Awesome. So, hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Jason Bradley, the founder of Epic Functional Medicine and the developer and creator of the Epic 5 plan. And today is Wednesday, February 12th, 2020. And this is Wellness Wednesdays with yours truly. And we're going to do a live, presentation webinar on a functional medicine approach to autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. And we have a number of people that are just kind of joining us all at once. So I'm going to try to keep my eye on the waiting room and admit people. So I'm sorry about that if I seem a little discombobulated. But we're going to be talking about a functional medicine approach to ASD. And for those of you that joined me a little bit early before we started recording, I have some notes and I don't really have a good place to put my notes. So I'm going to have to actually look away from the camera just a little bit here and there and make sure I cover everything that I want to cover. This is a complex topic, and certainly it hits home to a lot of us, a lot of individuals. Autism, of course, is on the rise. ASD, spectrum disorders are on the rise. We don't fully understand it. We have a number of theories as to why that is. And today we're going to try to look a little bit into that, look a little bit into the epidemiology, and then certainly look at some ways that we can start unpacking this and helping folks out. A lot of you guys know that autism hits, very deeply in my personal family. We have a couple of my nieces, nephews are on the spectrum. My younger daughter has been diagnosed on the spectrum, and with all different levels of functioning, in my own family. So it's interesting to see high functioning on the spectrum, whatever that means, and then certainly low functioning on the spectrum, whatever that means. But again, it's just interesting that this particular disorder doesn't seem to present itself, in the same way in every single child. And, there's probably a lot of variance, a lot of variables there. Certainly there's going to be variance in the health of the individual child. There's certainly going to be variables in, what the causalities are. And again, we don't really fully understand what the causalities of ASD is. There's not a single test that you can, like a laboratory test that you can take and say, oh, hey, you turned out positive for ASD. That's what's going on. It's more of a diagnosis based on symptomatic behavior. Certainly there's, different scoring sheets, and if you score so many points, that's probably what it is. But again, although the diagnosis itself isn't new by any means, the understanding of it certainly is still in development. I think that's a good way to say that. So, what we found with a functional medicine approach to autism and folks on the ASD spectrum, what we found is that when we just jump in and apply some basic fundamental, health foundation to really any individual, people tend to get better. I can't say that, what I'm going to present right now is a cure for autism. It's certainly not. I wish I had that. I would happily share that with the world. I would happily share that, with my own family members that are suffering. And yet at the same time, what we do see is that when families, and I want to emphasize families, do approach this from a, hey, I might not be able to control every variable, but there are certain things that are within my control, and I'm going to do everything I can to, keep those things that are within my control. I'm going to do everything I can to control those areas. We find that people tend to just get better, maybe not all the way better, but at the same time, definitely their health improves quite a bit. So, we talk a lot about the Epic 5 plan as it relates to things like autoimmunity. And what we see when we apply the Epic 5 plan and personalized functional medicine to folks that are suffering from different types of autoimmunities, we see, not only their symptoms getting better, but we also see their antibodies on the labs very often flip from positive to negative. And that's a good thing. Nobody wants antibodies in their system that are attacking. Nobody wants antibodies in their system that are attacking their own body. So the reason I bring that up is that one of the theories about autism is that this might be an ill-diagnosed or an undiagnosed autoimmunity. It certainly seems to present in a way that could be in some ways considered a neurological autoimmunity. Certainly there is whole body health that's involved. And like I said, it's a very complex disorder that we don't really fully understand. But a while ago, when I was reading about, autism theory, I, came across this idea that somebody said, hey, it seems to follow the trajectory of an autoimmunity. It seems to be progressive. It seems to be whole body. And it seems to be, to a certain extent, almost like a neurological inflammation. Also, when you look at the epidemiology of autoimmunity, which, are on the rise, it follows right in accordance with autism, cases of autism. So again, I don't want to say there's a one-to-one correlation there and that autism is related to autoimmunity, but there does seem to be a very strong correlation, a very strong relationship, at least between the epidemiology and the rising of autoimmunities and ASD in the U.S. population, actually worldwide. So when I noticed that, I always have people that are getting a hold of me, asking me questions like, hey, I know that you help autoimmunities. I know that you're the thyroid guy. I know that you're good with GI or, whatever it happens to be. But, I get these questions. Can you help fill in the blank? And I do get a lot of questions from parents saying, hey, do you think that you or functional medicine could help autism? And, my answer from the hip is it's not going to hurt, right? I mean, anytime we start to implement good health practices, anytime we start to implement health preservation, anytime that we're going in and balancing out, chemistry, getting rid of the bad stuff, putting in the good stuff, and balancing out the body, I certainly don't think that could hurt anyone. So it's a safe way, or it's a safe bet, so to speak, that, worst case scenario, it's not going to hurt, and it probably would help. But when I started reading again about that correlation between autoimmunity and autism, and even people theorizing that it does seem to present like a neurological autoimmune disorder, I started wondering, hey, I wonder if we actually said, what if we took functional medicine, and what if we took the Epic 5 plan and we started applying it to, with families that are suffering with ASD in that family dynamic. And I keep bringing up families, and I'll come back there in a minute. So, we started looking at these kids not only from a functional medicine point of view and running the chemistry and finding out, where are their nutrients and, what do their hormones look like depending on the age, what does their metabolism look like, hydration status, et cetera. While we're doing that, what if we started working with the families and making sure that the parents of these kids understood what it means to be hydrated, and what it means to eat a healthy diet. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And what it means to have proper movement and get, catecholamines out of the body that are causing stress and distress. What it means to work with stress management in a diligent and structured way, and what it means to have good sleep patterns. When we started working with families, as opposed to, just take the kid and help the kid out, we started noticing something. A lot of times, we had a few different families, a number of families, and I'm not going to name names, obviously, but that we started noticing patterns. We had families that would be all in, and man, if the kid is going to eat vegetables and healthy fats and healthy proteins and berries and drink water and lots of salads and lots of plants, whole family's going to do it. And they were in it to win it. And we started noticing that those kids got better. I don't want to say all the way better, but certainly we saw massive improvements in their scores, on the spectrum, so to speak, and in their symptomatic presentation, in their social connections, all of those pieces. We also had a group of families that would say, hey, by God, if you say that my kid needs to do that, I will make sure that my kid does that. And now whether or not the family was doing it was kind of a crapshoot. They made sure that the kid, did X, Y, and Z and ate this way and moved this way and drank this much water and, made sure to get their vitamin D in or whatever it happened to be. But, the family might be doing something else. And, as an example, maybe the kid is on a plant-based diet and having, lean protein and eating avocados and doing all that. And we already know that certain kids that are on the spectrum really get locked. I mean, it's a very common finding that kids that are on, the spectrum, especially the further along they are, really get locked into eating a very specific type of food every single meal, every single time. You know, I swear it's macaroni and cheese and hot dogs. It's what I hear all the time from all the parents that we work with, right? So here we are taking a kid that likes macaroni and cheese and hot dogs and then changing their diet radically. But then the family, they're still eating, you know, whatever they want. You know, I mean, they don't want to eat that way. They don't want to change their diets. And so ultimately what happens is there becomes a friction because that kid is also struggling. And what we would see is that those kids would actually have even more anxiety, and sometimes their symptoms would get worse. And then taking that even further, we had some families that just didn't reinforce anything. I mean, they'd have the stress of knowing changes that they had to make, whether it be, again, you know, drinking more water, eating a certain way, having some structure at bedtime, you know, and in the morning and this and that and the other thing. But they themselves as just a family unit just absolutely, you know, weren't disciplined enough, not only with themselves, but with their children. And ultimately, we didn't see progress with those people either. So we've been very careful about the type of family that we do take on to help, you know, with kids with ASD. We've been very careful to say that when we take on a child, and actually this goes for all of my pediatric clients, when we take on a pediatric client, we actually mandate that we're taking on the whole family, and that the whole family is going to be participatory, and the whole family is going to follow along with whatever recommendations we give for the child or the children, because that's what we found to be most effective. So again, coming back to, we're going to talk about, again, those families that we had the best success with. When we talk about those families, or when we look at those families, one of the things that comes out over and over again is that we were able to implement that EPIC 5 plan that I've spoken about a number of times, you know, getting enough water in, making sure that the kid, and again, the family, is not dehydrated, making sure that we're eating on plan. You know, the EPIC 5 plan really has eliminated inflammatory foods, the box can wrap packaged processed foods. It's a whole foods diet. You know, to quote Michael Pollan again from Omnivore's Dilemma, you know, eat real, it's mostly real food, mostly plants, and not too much, right? And that's really what the EPIC 5 is that it's real food. It's not box can wrap packaged processed. It's mostly vegetables, you know, so green vegetables, cruciferous vegetables, colored vegetables, again, that are non-nightshades. You know, we recommend healthy fats, healthy proteins. Berries are really the only sweet, fermented foods, and making sure that we get enough acids in the diet, lemon juice, lime juice, apple cider vinegars to stimulate digestion. And again, we found that when we take that diet and we have those families do that, drink enough water, get the kids moving in a very structured way every single day, get at least 20, 30 minutes of movement in a day, you know, even more if we can. Have a structured stress reduction or stress management time every day, at least 20 minutes. But ideally, you know, it'd be great if we could have 15, 20 minutes in the morning and in the evening, and maybe even midday. Just take a minute and breathe, focus on the breath. When we have an evening routine and have a very healthy sleep hygiene, and then have a very structured morning routine, we find that overwhelmingly these kids get better. Again, maybe not all the way better. Again, if I had a cure for autism, I would bottle and sell it and probably be a trillionaire, right? Actually, I'd just give it away, to be honest. But nonetheless, if I had that, I'd give it to you guys. But I do know that a huge chunk of helping these kids out is making sure that they have that lifestyle managed. You know, when we look at just articles on, and this is my notes. For those of you that joined late, I have some notes because I couldn't remember where all my research came from. So I just have a few notes here. But nonetheless, you know, when we look at kids on the ASD on the spectrum, we find that when we do these studies, they have a very low amount of, a lower amount of energy production than the average kid. And we think that that's due in a lot, because overwhelmingly these kids are dehydrated. There's a great article all the way back in 2012 in a journal called Molecular Psychiatry that was looking at dehydration and ASD, and found that basically overwhelmingly kids are just dehydrated. I mean, those ASD kids are severely dehydrated. And what's interesting is, you know, again, I'm not picking on any parents. So please understand that I'm not trying to say someone's doing it right, someone's doing it wrong. I think that when you're in a high stress situation, and I think that when you're in like a crisis moment and just trying to do whatever you can for your kid, to help your kid feel better and be better, and you just want everything to be okay, you start to make, quick decisions, and you start to look for, what can I do right now, to help this thing out right now that might not be the best decision for the long term. We're all conditioned to do that, right? We all want immediate gratification. So again, this isn't coming down, but nonetheless, again, food and drinks become a major issue and a major battle for a lot of parents with kids on the spectrum. And anyway, coming back to dehydration, sometimes I hear parents saying things like, he or she, my kid, won't even drink water. All that they'll drink is fill in the blank, right? And it could be anything from, flavored teas with a lot of sugar in it, or soda, just sugar, just a bunch of sugary drinks, basically. And that's all that they'll drink. And the reality is, and I say this out of tough love, I'm saying this to myself, with a child that is very highly functioning on the spectrum. I'm saying this to my family members, with kids that are maybe not quite as high functioning on the spectrum. And I'm saying this to all adults. The reality is, we just need to say, hey, Jimmy, Sally, child on the ASD spectrum, I need you to drink water. And that's what we're going to drink. And, that kid is going to probably throw a fit, especially because, depending on where they are on the spectrum, and they may not like it, but over time, with that same consistent message, they're going to drink water. It's kind of the same thing with eating, mac and cheese and hot dogs are not constructive to health. I think everybody knows that. I don't think there's anyone that would think, what's the healthiest thing that I can eat right now and feed my children? How about mac and cheese and hot dogs? I know that we know better, but again, when the kid is throwing a fit, we tend to go for this instant gratification and not thinking about the long-term consequences. And what we found at our house is that when you don't have those other options available at all, when there's nothing else available except healthy food and water to drink, eventually the kids will eat healthy food and drink water, because underneath all of it, there's a survival instinct. These kids want to survive too. And eventually they get hungry enough that, the carrots start to sound pretty good, and the grilled chicken actually smells pretty good and tastes pretty good. And they're so parched that eventually they'll drink that water. And then again, if that's all that's available, then that's what they're going to do. When we have options that are available at the house, they're going to go for those options, right? Every child is going to do that, not just ASD kids. Every single child on the planet is going to go for those options. At our house, food and drink is, I make a joke, it's like second to religion, right? We take that stuff very seriously. Rachel and I keep our house, cleansed of that junk food. If it's box, can, wrap, package, processed, it's not allowed in our house. And yet, I promise you, if I stood up right now and went in and opened up our cupboards, there's going to be something there. We saw our 19-year-old as an example. God bless her, and I love her, and she's awesome, and she takes health very seriously. I went into her bedroom last night. She was doing something, and she had some, what are they called? Corn chips. She had some corn chips and like some salsa that was like, just like jarred salsa. And she was just sitting there eating corn chips and salsa. And there's worse things people could eat, don't get me wrong. And I looked at her and I said, where did you get that? And she said, I bought it. It's my money. I can do what I want. And the truth is she can. She's 19, right? Again, I'm not judging her for it, but like I said, even in our house where food and drink is second to religion, and I'm teasing about that, maybe third after religion or faith and family, and then maybe food, right? But nonetheless, even in our house, stuff creeps in. We still do a nearly weekly purging where we look around the house and make sure that nothing is crept in, because I don't want those foods in our house for a lot of reasons. Number one, I don't want either of our kids, but especially our younger kid, to have access to that stuff. But number two, I don't want access to that stuff. I'm just like everybody else too, that if there's junk food around, of course I want to eat it. Who doesn't want to eat junk food, right? I mean, there's a reason that we're all craving it. I mean, they have food scientists that create food-like products that make us crave it. So again, coming back to helping that family out, it's not good enough to say little Jimmy or little Sally needs to do X, Y, and Z and eat this way. We really need that house purged and cleansed and watched like a hawk, so that Jimmy and Sally really only have healthy options in water. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of parents, when I get down to the nitty gritty, the problem isn't really with the kids. The problem ultimately is with the parents, and they're not ready to make those choices, and they're not ready to take that firm stance. And again, it makes me very sad because, again, we've seen with the parents that jump in and do it with their kids, we know their kids could be helped. And it makes me so sad for the children. It makes me sad for the whole family, in fact. And I know that that's very, you know, bold of me to say. I'm not, again, trying to press buttons. I'm not trying to point fingers. There is a lot of food addiction issues in America. I've written about this. You know, I've written about this in textbooks. I've written about this in articles. I've blogged about this and vlogged about this. I mean, food addiction is everywhere. It's inescapable. And it unfortunately plagues all of us, but it really hits home in chronic disease families. And certainly part of that is that ASD family. So again, the other problem is with the hydration status, we've also found that a lot of these kids, when we start running labs, because a lot of these kids are on medications as well, right? Because what we do is we take a kid with ASD and on the spectrum, and we start pumping them full of medications for X, Y, and Z, usually behavioral disorders, right? And again, the problem with that is that those meds over time, no matter what we want to say, they do damage to the liver and or kidneys. And when we start tracking that, we start to see that, you know, on the labs. And again, one of the ways to mitigate that damage is to get more water into the system. Again, the solution to pollution is dilution, as I always like to say. So let's get water into that system and keep things flushed out, you know, quite a bit. Again, we talked a little bit about that Epic 5 diet, you know, and Michael Pollan's, you know, quote, you know, eat real food, mostly plants, and not too much. I really took that wholeheartedly when we created the Epic 5 plan. And again, the Epic 5 plan was created for folks with autoimmunity and chronic disease. But what we found is when we apply it to families, I don't want to say the kid with ASD, but to families that have someone in the family with ASD, and everybody participates, we see, just like our autoimmune clients, symptoms getting better, maybe not 100% resolved, but we do see symptoms getting better. And we also see, again, just things improving over time. Again, one of the things that's been studied a lot is this thing called propionic acid, or PPA. Back in 2019, so mid last year, we started seeing this in a couple of areas. There's a journal called Scientific Reports, another one called the Journal of Developmental Behavior in Pediatrics. Boy, if I could say that whole thing. That one was from 2017 that kind of first presented this. But we started to see preservatives like PPA, propionic acid, being directly related to ASD. And again, this was really our first, it's not our clue, we've had a lot of suspicions, but this was one of the first published papers saying food additives, box can, wrap, packaged processed foods, food additives, preservatives are probably related to the rise in ASD, you know, in the epidemiology. I'll say this too, they haven't done these studies, but if we did those same studies and started to look at autoimmune folks, I have a feeling we'd find the same stuff, right? The reality is that, you know, in the last 20, 30 years, we've created 40, 50,000 chemicals, brand new novel chemicals that we have released into the environment, that we spray on our foods, lace into our foods. We're now manipulating genetically foods and lacing in things like xenoestrogens. Guys, we have you know, not to mention that when we start to preserve stuff and, you know, put it on the shelves, you know, so that it can sit there on the shelf for, you know, 15 years without ever degrading, you know, shelf life is key, right? In grocery management. When we start putting those chemicals into our systems, it's making us sick. It's why we're seeing, I mean, I firmly believe it's why we're seeing the rise of autoimmunity. It's why we're seeing the rise of chronic illness. It's why we're seeing, you know, the rise of ASD and other chronic disorders. Again, so very important that we're choosing organic. It's very important that we're not eating box can, wrap, packaged processed foods for all of us. But, for folks suffering with chronic illnesses, autoimmunity, and then certainly that ASD family, we need to just eat real food. People always want to know, well, what's a real food? Is bread a real food? And I'll say, is it box, can, wrap, package, processed? And they're like, well, yeah, it comes in a package. Well, it's probably not a real food, and then I get people that try to get really smart, and they say things like, well, at my grocery store, they only sell radishes in those plastic bags, but they're radishes and it's in a bag. So is it you said box, can, wrap, bag, package, process, it's in a package, so does that count? And of course, I kind of wink at them. I'm like, it's a radish, so it's probably okay. My grocery store sells radishes both in the bag and outside of the bag. I don't know that one is better than the other, so there you go, choose organic. But nonetheless, I think that's interesting, right? I also think that, speaking of not trying to get too into personal, functional medicine, but one of the things when we start looking at these kids and start looking at their GI, I don't know if I have a GI section or not. I think I must. Not really. So I'll talk about it now. We start looking at their GI, we start to notice some things. Number one, these kids on the spectrum don't digest foods well. Now, why that is, I don't know. There's a whole host of issues that we could bring up here. Is it, prior antibiotic use? There seems to be a correlation between antibiotic use and the development of autism or being on the spectrum. Maybe. Do antibiotics throw off digestion? Absolutely. Every single time antibiotics will throw off digestion because they're going to kill off your probiotic bacteria, and then all of a sudden we're not digesting food as well. It's probably also one of the reasons we're seeing a rise in chronic disease, autoimmunities, and et cetera. But yeah, one of the ways that we work around that, again, with the EPIC 5 plan, we recommend lemon juice, lime juice, apple cider vinegars, acidic, citric acid, acetic acids, trying to stimulate that digestion a little bit. We recommend eating fermented foods that are going to be higher in good beneficial probiotic bacteria. So again, we can't fix everything, but at the same time, to quote Hippocrates, let food be thy medicine and thy medicine be food. It's very important that we start back at the diet, and I can't, emphasize how important that is. Movement. These kids have that are on spectrum have a lot of anxiety and a lot of catecholamines in their bodies. Catecholamines are stress chemistry, right? Stress hormones. And one of the best ways to get rid of stress hormones is literally to exercise vigorously, right? Walk, run, do jumping jacks, somersaults, burpees, climb, bike. Whatever we need to do to get these kids moving, but they should be moving vigorously for at least 30 minutes a day at a minimum. If they need to move more than that, let them move more than that. I think it's sad to me. I was going to say disgusting, but I edited my word. It's very sad to me that, in our public school system these days, we've basically gotten rid of recess. Kids don't move as much. Their lunches have been shortened quite a bit. I know that, here in our local public school system, which is, one of the best in the nation with outcomes, they have really cut back on activity levels. They by the time the kids are in even junior high, there are no more, recesses. Certainly when you get to high school, there's no recess at all. There's no outside activity or outside time or just movement time other than your, mandatory PE class that you have to take, at least one semester in your high school years. It's pretty paltry. And again, I think that there's been a lack of emphasis on movement, and I think it's affecting all children. But I think for kids that have a propensity toward, being on the spectrum, I think this is a huge detriment. And I think that we need to, have some serious discussions about what our public education looks like. But again, that's another discussion for another day. Part of that, though, means that the kids need to be moving more. But, that puts the burden back on the parents. The parents need to ensure that their children are getting at least 30 minutes of vigorous activity every single day. But you know what? I said that, we want to treat the whole family. So I would say the whole family should get that every day, right? That's just good advice. And unfortunately, I think it's funny when people say things like, well, we don't have time to do that, but they have time to binge watch Netflix, right? Need I say more? I'll let everybody chew on that themselves. We need daily planned stress management periods. I grew up in Fairfield, Iowa, which is the, the peace capital of the world, the hippie capital of the Midwest. The Maharishi Mahesh Yogi started a university there. It's been home to, at different times, the Beatles, when they were following the Maharishi back in the day, Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys, Oprah Winfrey said even recently that it's, the best small town in the United States. I was privileged to grow up there for a lot of reasons. It's a smallish town, 20,000 people, but at the same time, a very global view. We have a very large Indian and Hindu population. And again, we were brought up with meditation, transcendental meditation, being part of our normal everyday culture, right? So in Fairfield, every single morning at 7 a.m. and every single evening at 5 p.m., every single day, 7 days a week, the majority of the town would congregate together or in their own homes, at least at the same time, but would either come together in what we would call the Golden Domes. I know this sounds really trippy, and it is really trippy. I totally hear it. But these huge domed buildings, and they would go in and meditate together. Or if you couldn't make it to the dome, you would do it at your house. And you would literally just spend some time with introspection, do some deep breathing. Some people would chant, Om or some, personalized mantra of some word. But nonetheless, I grew up in an area where it was completely normal to meditate twice a day, wait for it, for an hour. So from 7 to 8 a.m. and from 5 to 6 p.m., completely normal to set everything down and just meditate, right? Just breathe, just be in that moment. And, studies have been done showing that that's called transcendental meditation. Studies have been done looking at transcendental meditation, showing that it helps with cardiovascular disease, and it lowers blood pressure, and it lowers heart rates, and it seems to, be related to cancer survival and recovery from chronic illness and all kinds of stuff, right? And all that it is just sitting and breathing, right? But again, we don't really do that in our culture, right? We don't really, in American culture, step back and say, hey, let's take a few minutes in the morning, a few minutes in the evening, a few minutes maybe in the middle of the day, and just breathe and just be and set it all down. And we certainly are not taking, for the majority of us, taking the time to teach our children to do that 2-3 times a day as well, right? Having grown up in Fairfield, I thought it was, please understand, as a child, I thought it was ridiculous to have to sit for an hour every day. And, who would want to do that? And I would hate to do that, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So I've had a resistance to, long meditative practices. But I do like the idea of just periodically throughout the day, taking a minute and breathing, like literally 1 minute and breathing. One of the things that I do every time I'm in the car, I've taught my kids this too. Every time we're in the car and we go somewhere, when we get to our destination, let's just take a minute and breathe. Just literally 1 minute, 4 or 5 really deep breaths, all the way in, hold it, and all the way out, and just center and ground and just know that it's going to be okay, right? And that's very important practice for all of us. But for those kids with a lot of catecholamines, those stress hormones, again, taking that moment to breathe, even if it's just 1 minute, that's better than 0 minutes. Certainly 5 minutes is better than 1 minute, right? And I don't know what the magic number is, but I know with my clients, we recommend at least 20 minutes a day of getting some stress reduction, right? And I think that that's good practice. And I think for the ASD family, it might be a nice practice to wake up in the morning, set your intention, and do some deep breathing together, 10, 15 minutes. Do it at the end of the day. Set the work down. We're done working. Let's set it down. And again, some deep breathing together. And again, if it works, and a lot of these kids on the spectrum really like this, teach them body relaxation techniques that if they start to feel that bubbling up, and they can feel it, they understand it. It's not like there's this like crazy outburst that you see, the kid throwing the tantrum and laying down on the floor and demanding this and parents crying and not knowing what to do. That doesn't happen, from 0 to 60, in nanoseconds. That develops over a little course of time. And you can actually teach children to be aware and conscious of that bubbling up, and really teach them some body relaxation techniques. And if nothing else, some breathing techniques that then they can start to just take control of what seems like an uncontrollable situation. So again, the other cool thing is, for those of you that follow me long enough, you know that I'm a huge fan of a device called the Muse Device, MUSE. Their regular website is choosemuse.com, I think. I might have that wrong, choosemuse.com. We actually have a discount code or a discount website. I have a relationship with that company that you can go there and check it out. But if you want to order anything, you can pay full price if you want. But if you want to get things at a discount, I think they give my patients 20% off. Just get a hold of me and I'll happily share that link with you guys so that you can get that Muse device. But what's cool about it, the Muse device is an at-home neurofeedback device that measures brainwave activity and syncs right with your smartphone, your smart device, and you get real-time feedback. And it teaches you how to entrain your brain to be in a more calm state. And I love my device. I've actually not met anybody that doesn't like theirs. I have said that if any of my patients buy one and they hate it and the company won't take it back, I will buy it from them as long as it's not damaged, and I will just resell it or give it away as a gift, which I've only had to do one time. And in fact, that person didn't even open the box, still the seal on it. They bought it. They just decided they didn't want to use it. Rachel and I bought it back and then gave it away as a gift. I think we gave it away as a prize. Everybody likes their Muse device. And all the way back in November of 2015, in a journal called Brain and Behavior. Boy, my mouth can't speak today. They looked at neurofeedback and ASD. And sure enough, neurofeedback not only helps the average Joe learn to be calm and take control of their brain, but neurofeedback can help as well. So again, it's something else that we can implement with kids on the spectrum. But again, I would vote that the whole family does it. I love those Muse devices. Again, if you want to pay full price, go to choosemuse.com. They always have some kind of special going on. I have a special link that will get you the best deal that's out there. And I don't know what it is, but it's typically at least 20% off, sometimes a little bit more. It fluctuates. It's not a static deal. We're just guaranteed that our patients will pay the lowest rate that's available on the internet. So again, I have that link if you want it. Sleep patterns, right? Consistency is key with kids on the spectrum. They need structure. They need parameters. They need to know expectations and consequences and all that kind of stuff, and they work very well with structure, very, very well structured. They do not do well with fluidity. And that's probably true for all humans. And I know that, people like to be free spirits and, nobody wants to be on a schedule and, live freely and, blow with the wind and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is, we just don't do well with that. None of us do well with that. Humans do the best with structure. Our humans, like even our bodies, just our physiology, we are healthier if we go to bed at the same time roughly every night and get up at the same time roughly every morning, 7 days a week. If we happen to go to bed late, it's been shown that if we get up at the same time every single day, despite of what time we went to bed, our bodies do better, right? Kids on the spectrum are no different. They need an evening routine. They need good sleep hygiene, a dark room, a cool room, maybe a fan blowing, anything to cultivate sleep. And then, quiet room, so to speak, maybe some white noise. And then a morning routine. We're going to wake up at the same time every day. And this is what we're going to do in the morning. And maybe it involves, doing the Muse or something like that, right? Or some other meditative practice. But nonetheless, sleep patterns and other patterns are going to be important. And again, that's kind of the Epic Five, right? But when we start to look at the literature and the journals about ASD kids that are suffering, it seems like the Epic Five that was developed again for autoimmunity and chronic disease seems to, be researched well with the ASD families as well. So I thought I would do this presentation and kind of lead with that. But the other thing that we found is that, when we couple what we just talked about with personalized functional medicine care, we found that, when we remove food sensitivities, we talked about additives and not having box can wrap packaged processed foods, eating organic, all that kind of stuff. But when we actually remove foods that their bodies are sensitive to or have allergies to, these kids do better as well, which is interesting. We found that a lot of these kids, and again, I'm not going to get into this argument, but I'm going to say it because it's the elephant in the room. We have found heavy metal toxicities with these kids, right? Now, the reason I wanted to bring that up is that there are ways to test that, and there's certainly ways to get heavy metals out of the body. The main argument right now that kind of started this whole and again, I'm not going to be political and I'm not going to get sucked into this. I'm going to be careful with my language, but this whole anti-vax movement, anti-vaccine movement was that, there are heavy metal preservatives in these vaccines that are causing damage to children, either causing, fevers and seizures or possibly autism or stimulating autoimmune disease. And the reality is, it doesn't matter what anybody says on either side of that fence. We don't know if that's true. I can sit here and tell you there's evidence to suggest that that is a very true statement, and there's evidence to suggest that that's not a true statement. And I think the variable is the kid that got injected. I think that there are certain kids that are going to be more sensitive and other kids that are not, right? And probably overwhelmingly, it's okay. And in other kids, and that maybe 3% of the population, it's just not okay. And there's just no way for us to screen which kids are going to be okay and which kids aren't, right? And I think that's the bigger problem. Part of the question is, why do they put those heavy metals in those types of medicines? I don't know. I mean, it's preservative, right? It's shelf life again. Same reason they're putting that propionic acid and other preservatives in the foods you buy at the grocery store. They don't want that stuff to go bad. They want it to have the longest shelf life possible because it's cheaper for them to make very large batches and have a 20-year shelf life than to make smaller batches and have it, go bad in a couple of months, right? So again, heavy metal toxicities. Find out if the kid has heavy metals and get it out. Doing some neurotransmitter testing. We find a lot of times that the kids have imbalanced neurotransmitters. And certainly when we go in and help balance out those neurotransmitters, again, very fine tuning, either what medications or I don't know if these are supplements, nutrients, or, targeted, I'm going to call them nootropics or neurotropics, but, targeted substances, e.g. Like tryptophan, right? Or phenylalanine or, pharmagaba or et cetera, but going in and targeting how to manipulate those neurotransmitters and create balance there is huge. Again, if we find a lot of these kids are positive for autoimmunities. And again, we need to go in and address those triggers that are stimulating the immune system to attack the body. And when we remove those triggers, people get better. Put in the regulatory mechanisms to keep the T regulator cells working and functioning and regulating that immune system. Again, it seems like the ASD improves as well. A lot of these kids are suffering from thyroid and or adrenal disorders. So again, in functional medicine, we're going to dig in and do a very deep dive into thyroid and adrenal. Same thing with metabolism. I think though the metabolism, what we see is a lot of these kids are on the autism spectrum disorder really have very poor liver function. Typically even showing signs of early high cholesterol, even as children, showing signs of early onset prediabetes or even diabetes, and higher insulin levels. And I think that a lot of that is driven because of the food choices. Again, I don't know why it's always mac and cheese and hot dogs and a sugary drink, but ultimately that's what I see all of the time. Now, I don't know why. It's just that when I meet a family, that's what they say their kids eat and drink. And I don't know why. Even in my own family, like I said, unless we create the structure and the function, the situation where those foods are not allowed, I'm sure that's what the kids would be eating in my own family. So again, but metabolic, and again, that comes back to dietary changes. We find a lot of nutrient deficiencies. Again, I think a lot of this is due to poor gut health, poor probiotic load, like I said, poor digestion. And again, so we got to look at digestive labs as well. And I just don't think, and I really mean this, I don't think that this can be handled. And by this, I mean the ASD with meds alone. I don't think it can be handled with going gluten-free, or following some fad diet. I really think that to really help and push the function as high up as we can, you're going to need to work with somebody that has experience with ASD, that understands the complexities of it, that understands medicine, that understands functional medicine, dietary medicine, nutritional medicine. The list goes on and on there, right? Environmental toxicology with heavy metals, immunology with the autoimmunity and the food sensitivities. It's going to take a very highly skilled doctor to work with you and work with you guys as a family unit to help those kids out. You know, and I see all these protocols that are out there. I see some of my colleagues that I love, you know, saying things like, I've got an autism protocol, and if you just, you know, take these 28 supplements and do this, you know, protein shake in the morning, everything's going to be okay. And it's not. I mean, they're just, I don't know who they're kidding. I don't know if they're lying to themselves or other people or everybody, or themselves included. That those protocols just don't work. I mean, I think any dietary change that's positive is going to help, but really to really get in, we need structure. I really truly have seen with my own eyes implementing that Epic 5 plan plus personalized functional medicine can really be revolutionary to these families, to these kids. And again, the hardest part of the equation usually isn't the kid. The hardest part of the equation is usually getting the parents to cooperate and follow the advice. So, you know, oh, I have a few quotes here that I just wanted to share with you guys. And I was reading the first one, and I was like, that's a really good quote. Here it is. By optimizing the function of the system, we minimize the expression of disease and disorders and greatly improve the overall quality of life. And I was like, that's a good quote. Who's that by? That's by me. So that was my own quote. So I impressed myself there. But, you know, also, you know, I like this other quote by Dr. B.J. Palmer. You know, doctor you have in your hands is sacred trust. You know, guard it well. And Sir William Osler, Dr. Osler, founder of Johns Hopkins Medical School. The first duty of the physician is to educate the masses, you know, not to take medicine. And I want to emphasize there's a time and a place for medications. But I really think that ultimately, you know, we've really pushed in our society to have a diagnosis and treat it with a drug. And I just don't see ASD being treated with a medication. There may be a time and a place to use those for some of the symptomatic expressions, but ultimately there's a lot of, you know, deep diving that we have to do into internal medicine and chemistry. There's a lot of, you know, lifestyle and diet that we're going to have to address to really help these kids out. And again, I want to emphasize that if you're suffering, your kids are suffering, you know anybody that's suffering, you know, you can private message me, and you know, if I have the availability to help, I will. Can't promise that I will, but I'll definitely make sure that you're connected with somebody that knows what they need to know to help you guys out the best that they can. So again, covered a lot on ASD, functional medicine approach to it, looked at some literature, looked at the epidemiology, compared it to autoimmunity, talked about intervention between diet and lifestyle, and also personalized lab testing and personalized care that might need to be addressed that, you know, will be very specific for each individual. And it's a complex disorder, guys. It just is. It's one of the more complex disorders that we see at Epic. And, you know, I'm happy to say we have a good track record with it. And I'm happy to help these kids out. You know, like I said, it hits home. My younger daughter certainly is on the spectrum, doing as well as she can, you know, has a lot of social anxiety, and that does hinder her quite a bit in some areas, but she's working through that too. You know, but I know even in my family, I have a nephew that's maybe on the other end that really isn't functioning very well. And, you know, there's a long row to hoe there, so to speak. And, you know, all we can do is time and consistency and effort, and that's all that we can do. So listen, I love you guys. Thanks for joining. I don't see any questions. So I hope that was entertaining, informative. I hope you guys are walking away with some value and some direction. And like I said, if you know anybody that needs help, feel free to send them my way. And like I said, if I can help, I will. And if for some reason I just can't take the case, I'll make sure they're connected with somebody that knows what they're doing, that can take the case, and that they can get that help. There's no reason to suffer anymore. There is a methodology. It's just unique to each person. I love you guys. See you next week. Bye-bye.